Hello, this is Mrs. Bennett, and I thought now would be a good time just to take a little break from the new stuff and spend a little time talking about glossing, to just go over some of the rules and make sure you know how to do that. So if and when that comes up in your homework, or if that's something you need to help you with your homework, you've got the tools handy. So let's just go through some of these rules real quick. The goal of glossing is to write down exactly what you sign. So the goal is not just to put the words on paper, because ASL doesn't belong on paper, it belongs in the air. We just write it down to help us remember how to sign. So that means you should always sign a sentence before you write it down. Gloss is written above the English. Most of the time you have your English on the bottom and then the gloss goes above that. You need to write one word for every sign, and only the words you sign. So you don't need articles like an and a and the. There's all of those words that we pitched out the window that we don't sign, right, that we sent back to English class. They need to stay there, and they don't need to show up in your gloss. Glosses are written in capital letters. That way it's very easy to tell what is English and what is ASL, because they're formatted differently. When you need to include a non-manual signal, like a facial expression or a head nod, or an eyebrow movement, those non-manual signals are written above a line above the gloss. So the line should go over the signs that need that non-manual signal, and then you label above it. Now, I know sometimes on typing on a computer, or especially on something like a Google form, sometimes it's hard to make that extra line. So another way to do that is to write the non-manual signals in parentheses just before you need it. The rules that I taught you are a specific way to gloss, but it's not the only way to gloss. So this is another way you can do it. And I'll show you some examples of what that looks like later. When you need to mark a word that is to be fingerspelled, you precede it with the letters FS so that it reminds you to fingerspell and not thinking of what the sign is for that word. If you need to use deixis, which means to point to something, like a person or a thing or a location, you start with IX. Those are the middle letters in the word deixis, and the first and last letters in the word index, which means to point. And so you write IX and then a hyphen, and then you point to what you're referring to. Dad, Afghanistan, it, the dog, whatever it is. And then for classifiers, you're going to write CL and then a colon and tell me what hand shape you're going to use, whether that's a 3, a 4, an S, a claw, a flat hand. And then in parentheses, you're going to write what you're describing or what action you're showing. And so that's where you're going to show me instead of tell me. So now I'm going to practice with this sentence. So here's our first example. What do you call that thing that swings back and forth in a grandfather clock? So the first thing we need to do, because there isn't any time in this sentence, is to set up our topic. We're talking about a grandfather clock, so that goes first. And then I switch to the part that swings back and forth, right? And I don't have a name for that. Even if I did have the name for that, the right thing to do is to show you what that looks like. So I used a classifier. So I did CL and then a colon to say, hey, I'm using a classifier. And then I picked a label for my hand shape. I used an S in this gloss, but arm might have been a good choice as well. And then in quote marks, I described the movement that I made, right? I'm describing the pendulum swinging back and forth. By the way, pendulum is the name of the thing that swings inside the grandfather clock. Now, here's the comment of my sentence, right? And I've talked about the grandfather clock and then more specifically the thing that swings back and forth. But now my comment is, I don't know what that is, right? It's a question. So I could sign the word name and, use those H hand shapes tapping twice. Or if I move the whole thing forward, instead of tapping that, I move both hands forward, then it becomes a verb. Like, what do you call that? Or what's the name that's been given to that? So I can use the sign name, or here I wrote name it, right? Because I'm giving it a name. And then I'm going to finish with the question, what? And that needs a specific non-manual signal. And because I'm typing, it's hard to label it above. So in this case, if you look, I put WHQ before the word what to remind me to put my eyebrows down and lean forward because it's a WH question. And now I'm going to put the whole thing together, and here's what it looks like when I sign it. So here's another example we're going to talk through today. The sentence is, my cell phone is in the kitchen under the light switch near the stove. Again, in ASL, we always start with time, but this sentence doesn't specify it. So that means we can move on to the topic, which is my cell phone. The point of the sentence is to tell someone where the cell phone is, right? So in order to prep them for the answer, we're going to ask the rhetorical question, where? Right? So I'm going to use parentheses RHQ, and that's going to tell me to put my eyebrows up, because even though it is a WH word, we're not asking a WH question. I'm not asking you where my cell phone is. I'm prepping to tell you. So my cell phone, where? Here it is. Then I'm going to point over there toward the kitchen, whatever room of the house that's in. And then I can sign the word kitchen, which in this case is actually cook room. And then I'm going to go more specific from there. The next big piece of information in that sentence is by the stove. So I'm going to sign stove, which is hot burners. And burners really doesn't have a sign, so I'm going to classify it. CL, and then the hand shape I use is a bent L, and I'm going to show you the 4 burners on the cooktop. Now that I have you in the right part of the kitchen and facing the right direction, I can indicate the light switch that I'm talking about and flip that up and down. And then I can point underneath the light switch to where my cell phone is. And then here's how that sentence looks when you sign it. I hope this has been a helpful review and that you're going to do great things with glossing.